Okay, welcome back. And now that we have looked at the new code in our project, let's go ahead and live code some new stuff. We're going to, over the course of the next few videos, introduce a new many-to-many relationship. That relationship is going to exist between events and tags. So if you think of a tag as you've kind of gotten used to them being used on, say, social media posts or on blog posts, a tag is just a little label that can be applied to a piece of data or an object or a blog post. And so we want to use that sort of same functionality in our application. So people can say, add topical tags to an event that they're hosting. And so these would be things like maybe the programming language that's being discussed, or a specific framework, or some sort of other piece of meta information. So tags typically have a many-to-many relationship. An event might have many tags, and a tag can be associated with many events. So that's what we're going to do. We already have events in our models folder here. We already have tags, but there's no relationship between them. Since this is a many-to-many relationship, we're not going to be able to use the approach that we took when we were relating events and categories. That allowed us to, the one-to-many nature of that relationship allowed us to put a foreign key column or a foreign key property on the event class that related it to a specific category, because each event could only have one category. In this case, a foreign key column won't work because the relationship is many-to-many. We can't have a potentially unlimited number of foreign key columns on our table. So what we're going to have to do is to create an intermediary object or an intermediary table. The way this is commonly done in the relational database world is to create a table that links the two tables that have a many-to-many relationship, and that is called a join table. Correspondingly, we're going to create a join object. So let's go ahead and get started with that. In our models folder, let's go ahead and add a new class. And I'm going to call this EventTag. And so it's EventTag. This is just a common convention. If you're going to create a join object or a join table, you want to name it after the two things that are being joined. Okay, and what do I want in this particular class? So I want this to basically link or to represent a relationship between one specific event and one specific tag. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have properties in here for an event and properties in here for a tag. And those are going to be the two things that are related by a specific entity tag instance, or a specific entity tag row, as it will come to be once it's saved to the database. So I'm going to make an int and call this event ID. And so that's going to represent the ID of the event that I want. And then I'm going to make an event object itself that'll represent the object that I want. And as we saw when we were working with the one-to-many relationship, we want both of these properties just so it's easy to reference both the ID and the actual object as necessary. And let's see, now I need to put properties for tags. So I need tag ID. Oops. There we go. And then tag. Cool, and that's it. That's all I need for my event tag class. The way this table is going to look in the database, we'll see this towards the end of the video, is it's just going to have two columns. It's going to have a column for event ID, and it's going to have a column for tag ID. The event and tag properties will be populated based on the values of those IDs, and those will be populated by Entity Framework itself. Okay, and as with our other persistent classes, we need to go add a collection in here to our database context. So we're going to dbset event tag. We're going to call that event tags. All right. And there's one more thing we have to do here. So this will give us access to a dbset that stores event tags, and so that dbset, recall, is just the object that we use to query using Entity Framework to query objects out of the database. That's what we use our sort of .where, .include, .find, all of that stuff. That's our dbset. This particular persistent class is a little different from the others. Notice that I didn't include an ID field when I started my event tag class. That's something we've done every other time we've made a persistent class. In this case, however, we don't really want an ID field. In this case, we want the pair of event ID and tag ID to function as a primary key. So that ID field has always functioned as a primary key property, and it has translated to the primary key column in the relational database. In this case, though, we don't want an additional column. Remember, a primary key is a unique identifier for that row or for that object. And in this case, we want that unique identifier to consist, as I said, of the pair. And the reason why we want that to be the case is that an event and a tag should only be related to each other once. You shouldn't be able to say, add the same tag to an event twice. That shouldn't be possible. All right. So, you know, and it's not possible to have two copies of the exact same event that have the same tag, obviously. So we want to prevent that sort of behavior, and we don't need an additional column because we can function as our application can function as if the pair of these two fields together is unique, and that will function as a primary key. That's what's called a compound primary key. And so that's the sort of standard pattern you're working with when you work with join tables. You use the pair of columns together as a primary key. So we have to do a little bit to configure that in our DB context. So the way we'll do this, and this is code that I'm going to go ahead and type this out now. Just full caveat, I'm looking at the code on another screen next to me. This is not something you would be expected to remember. So you know, you might have to Google it or reference back to the textbook anytime you do this on your own. But I just want to type it out and talk about it as we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to override a method from the base DBContext class. So I'm going to call it protected override void. And the method we're going to be overriding is called OnModelCreating. And it takes a model builder. Okay. And this is a overridden method from the base class DBContext. And OnModelCreating is its name. This is essentially sort of what you might think of as an event. This method will be called when it's building the initial information about our application's model. And so this is a place where you can put configuration code about your models. So let's go ahead, and in here I'm going to call model builder. This is an object that lets me configure my model. And let's say entity EventTag .has key. And that key is going to be the following. So this key is a Lambda expression. It's going to take an object of type EventTag. That's why I called it ET. And then from there, I need to return the information that specifies what that key should be. And in this case, it's going to be the pair of event ID and tag ID. Okay. So just to reiterate, this OnModelCreating method gets called on the initial application startup, and we'll customize our model configuration using this model builder instance. And this one-liner here specifies that our event tag entity should have a compound key. That compound key should consist of the pair of its properties, event ID and tag ID. All right, let me go ahead and save. And I think we're going to stop right here in terms of adding new code. So we haven't actually added any controller or view code to work with event tags yet. That's okay. I want to break this stuff up into bite-sized pieces. The one thing I want to do before we move on is I want to come in here and I want to go ahead and run my database migrations. So again, to run a database migration, you need to make sure you're in the project directory within your solution. So make sure you're sort of 2 levels deep here, not at the outer solution directory, but then in the inner project directory. And then we say .NET EF migrations add, and we'll say adds event tag as our name for our migration. And while that's doing its work, I'm going to go ahead and start up my SQL Workbench. See here we have a tags table because we created that when we created that tag entity, but right now it doesn't relate to anything else, and there's no event tag table. So let's go back and run our migration. So I'll say .NET EF database update. This will apply the migration to the database. All right, looks to have been successful. I'll come and refresh my database view. Okay, so now I have this event tags table. It has 2 columns. That's good because those are the 2 properties we put into the class that we wanted to be persisted. Let's go ahead and look at some information about this. So if I go to the info, little eye icon there, might be hard to see on the screen, and I go to indexes, I see that I have one primary key index, and it's based off of the 2 columns, event ID, tag ID. So this is what I was talking about previously when I was saying that we have a compound primary key column there. So yeah, so we will now use this this new event tag persistent class to save relationships between events and tags, and then to query objects based on their relationships. And that's going to be coming up in the next few videos.